David is protected. In our last story, we learned how the favor of the Lord was upon David in everything he did. Every battle David led ended in victory, which made Saul's blood boil with jealousy. David developed a deep bond with Jonathan and married Saul's daughter. In this story, we will learn about Saul's jealousy spilling over onto David as he attempts to kill him a second time, inspired by the book of 1 Samuel. Crickets chirped outside the palace doors. A cool breeze slithered through the windows and swayed the curtains of David's bedroom. David slept soundly beside his wife in the quiet of the night. On the other side of the palace, whispers could be heard from closed doors. Saul's face was illuminated by a few flickering candles. There, in front of Jonathan and all his servants, Saul conspired to kill David. Saul paced the room, ranting quietly about David's growing popularity. The servants nodded in agreement, but Jonathan remained quiet in the corner with his arms folded. Saul rambled on in paranoia until he eventually grew tired and went to bed. When the servants departed to their own quarters, Jonathan snuck into David's bedroom. Gently and quietly he woke David up to tell him what his father had been saying. "He wants you dead," Jonathan whispered. "Be on your guard when the morning comes. Hide in secret while I gather more information from my father. Perhaps I can convince him otherwise." David nodded, and Jonathan left his room. David and his wife stayed up and waiting, praying that Jonathan would find favor with Saul. The morning broke, and Jonathan and Saul were gathered for breakfast. Jonathan looked up at his father, waiting for the right moment to speak about David. When the time was right, he opened his mouth and said, "Why would you sin against David when he has brought you nothing but fortune?" Saul perked up. Jonathan, already in too deep with his words, decided to continue, saying, "He risked his life with that giant, and Israel was saved. You saw it with your own eyes and rejoiced. Why then would you murder him without cause?" Saul sat there silent. His heart ached. There was a war going on in Saul's heart. A clashing of good and evil raged in the depths of his mind. What his son said was true. Saul did not truly want to harm David. His jealousy was misplaced, for David had done nothing but serve Saul faithfully as his own son. Saul suddenly felt a small burst of clarity and said, "As the Lord lives, I shall not harm David." Saul grinned ear to ear, and Jonathan let out a sigh of relief. He called for David, and the three of them fellowshipped as they once did. Together they strategized, ate, and enjoyed David's music. All was well, at least for a moment. War once again knocked on Israel's doors. The Philistines marched with great passion up against the armies of Israel. David laced up his armor and sharpened his sword. With his men behind him, David swooped into battle like an eagle against its prey. The Philistines feared David's sword and fled at the sight of him. Israel struck them with a great blow that day, and the people once again rejoiced over David's bravery. Saul could hear the cheering. The laughter and music awoke a slumbering hatred in Saul's heart. David entered into his courts and began to play the lyre again for Saul. As he strummed for his king, David could hear the slight shift in Saul's spear. David looked up as Saul hurried the spear towards his chest. David leapt to his left and crashed into the table. Saul stood, ready to mount another attack, but David escaped through the window and fled Saul's presence. Saul sent his men to David's house, but David's wife, Michal, made him escape through the window. Cleverly, she put a statue under the covers of the bed and put goat's hair on top of it. When Saul sent his men to kill David, they uncovered the blankets to find the statue and goat's hair. David ran all night towards Ramah. Tears and sweat fell from his face. He considered Saul like a father and had done nothing but serve him with respect and honor. David's heart was broken. He had his wife, his brother Jonathan, and his king Saul. Now all was seemingly lost. David continued his escape to the hills of Ramah. There he ran towards a large tent tucked in the hills. It was surrounded by a fence, and a few goats were grazing nearby. A fire was lit in front of the tent, and Samuel sat there staring at the stars. David did not know where else to go. He fell at Samuel's feet and told him all that Saul was doing. Saul caught word of David's whereabouts and sent men to go and kill him. When the men came to seize David, they found Samuel among his students leading a worship session. Before they could ask about David, the men spontaneously began to prophesy and worship God with them. Enraptured by the glory of God, the men were unable to find and kill David. 2 more times Saul sent men to kill David, and every time they were met with the Spirit of God. God was sending a clear message to Saul, saying, "My spirit is stronger than your will to kill. Do not pursue him." Yet Saul was stubborn and hell-bent on seeing David's head mounted on his spear. Saul took matters into his own hands and rode towards Ramah. He had not been there since he was last anointed by Samuel. The land made Saul uncomfortable. The evil spirit within him writhed as it entered into the presence of God's people. Saul walked up to Samuel, wanting to ask for David. Instead, Saul was struck by a wave of God's Spirit, and he too worshipped and prophesied. Saul tore his clothes and lay naked and humiliated in front of Samuel. Thus continued the battle over Saul's heart. David would be safe from Saul for now, but the evil that lingered over Saul would covet his blood. Saul's sickened mind was a tragic representation of pride's effect on the human soul. His paranoia and jealousy poisoned his thoughts and turned every action into foolishness. Saul would soon come face to face with his own sin, but not before he made David's life a living hell.